physiology. It's extremely important to understand. Now we have things that we refer to as passive transport, meaning they don't require ATP, and then we have things referred to as active transport, which do require ATP. They require energy for the cell. So let's talk about the passive transport first. The two kinds we're talking about are simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. And we could add osmosis in here as well. So we will talk about that. So simple diffusion is when something moves through the cell membrane from a high to a low concentration. So it's rolling a ball downhill. If I put a ball at the top of the hill and I let go of it, it's just going to roll downhill, right? Gravity will just take it along. Doesn't require any energy. Now, why is it called simple? It's because it does not require any kind of transporter or channel. Now, you contrast that with facilitated diffusion. Well, facilitated diffusion is the same in the sense of substances are moving from a high to a low concentration. But the difference here is we need some kind of facilitator. It's like you have an argument with someone and need someone to facilitate the argument or discussion or whatever, like a third party, whatever. We need something to get it to the cell membrane. And this is generally because it's hydrophilic, so it likes water. And we know the cell membrane is a phospholipid membrane. So lipid-based substances can move through, like fatty acids for the most part, and steroid hormones, which are based on cholesterol. Those things can move through the cell membrane without a transporter, and gases, which we'll talk about with simple diffusion, and water with osmosis. So, but these are things that can't just readily move through. Anyway, back to simple diffusion. So things that can move through via simple diffusion would be some things like gases. So like oxygen and CO2. So oxygen and CO2, and this will come up later again. It's going to come up later also in AP2. Hemoglobin's on red blood cells. Red blood cells are carrying these gases through, your blood. And oxygen is going to move from a high to a low concentration. So the cells are using up oxygen to make ATP. Oxygen levels will be low. So hemoglobin is more likely to just dissociate with oxygen and allow oxygen to move into the cell. It'll simply just move along in, right? We also see that in the lungs. Now CO2, same thing. If the cells are making lots of oxygen or making lots of ATP and using up all this oxygen, the two byproducts of that process are CO2 and water. So CO2 is going to want to move out of the cell for the most part and travel from intracellular to extracellular. So generally oxygen is just moving, it's moseying right on through this way. And usually CO2 is generally moving the opposite direction, but it depends if you're in the tissues of the lungs. That's beyond the scope of this topic, moving out. Either way, they don't need a facilitator. They're moving from a high to a low concentration. Now, osmosis, well, we'll touch on osmosis in a second. So facilitated diffusion, so these substances need a transporter. So good examples that'll come up over and over and over again are things like sodium and let's say calcium, right? These are primary to extracellular cations. They're in a higher concentration in the extracellular fluid than the intracellular fluid. They'll need a transporter or channel, so they have specific channels, right? There's sodium channels just for sodium. There's calcium channels just for calcium. This will come up in the muscles. This will come up, we talked about nerves. This will come up, we talk about the heart. So very, very important concept. They'll never go away. So they'll move from a high concentration to a low concentration. When I say sodium or calcium, move in via their own specific